Hello and welcome to this short presentation. Today's topic is the Kovter family of malware from initial access to detection and then eventually decontamination. What exactly is Kovter? It's malware which evolved over time. In the most recent incarnation, it was being used for click fraud. What is click fraud? Well, you know that there are advertisements that run on popular websites, and the advertiser pays the web page owner in proportion to the number of clicks that advertisement receives. Well, this is an attempt to abuse your infrastructure to perpetrate fraud and cause a number of those ads to be clicked where there's no intention actually of ever following through. This way, the advertiser pays the owner of the website, which is these fellows that have deployed Kovter, and they're doing it using your infrastructure. Well, one of the effective things about Kovter is that it evolved. I mean, if you think about infant mortality in the malware universe, it's actually very high. And only the ones that evolved rapidly over time because the attacker is busy investing in it are the ones that actually happen to have any impact. And Kovter is one such. It became fileless because it became obvious that all of your legacy antivirus were able to catch it and then delete it. And so it used autorun registries in Windows and a shell spawning technique to read malicious registry entries in an attempt to be much more evasive. So how does Kovter actually manage to get on your endpoints? Well, back in the day when Adobe Flash was a thing, simply because mobile internet wasn't as widespread and as speedy as it is now. If you wanted the rich experience, then Adobe Flash was being used on the desktop. And so malvertising, where they would get you to click on a bogus ad in the first place, was a technique to actually get it onto your endpoint. When Adobe Flash eventually died, thankfully, in part because of its vulnerabilities, but also because it had been overcome by events and the mobile internet is now fast enough. Another method of providing these infections is via the traditional spam email, the old infected Microsoft Office document kind of thing. Well, once it actually does get on your endpoint, if it is skips past your endpoint protection antivirus usually, why then it does a number of steps and ultimately it will create a registry entry, which is a binary file, and inject that registry entry to a standard process called regsvr32, which is part of the Microsoft family. This regsvr32, which is a known good thing, now infected in memory with this registry entry, will connect to various URLs and try to perform that click fraud. It will launch multiple instances of the browser in the background. Hopefully nobody is using Internet Explorer anymore, out of date now, but that would be one browser that was popular back at that time. It's also careful to wipe out all evidence of its own installation, including the files. So if you're scanning for dormant files, files that don't really make any sense, but are there and not doing anything, you won't find any of them because it leaves only registry entries, nothing on the file system. It also does some other sneaky things. It lowers your internet security settings and it sends personal information to a command and control server. This is important because you can now be marked as a victim, as somebody that has Kovter. And since Kovter has the ability to download updates or other infections, it means that this can be used for ransomware as a service, where your endpoint is auctioned off to somebody else because you got the initial infection through Kovter. So it's quite important to be able to detect and remove this silly thing. Here's the infection flow. It arrives in some fashion, and nowadays via spam email. It installs all of the components for shell spanning techniques, creates that registry entry containing all of the malicious scripts, and injects it into regsvr32, which will then connect to various URLs for click fraud. So we came across an infection of Kovter, and here's how the NetSurian managed OpenXDR service was able to catch it. First of all, the customer was a consumer bank in North America. And of course, these days, e-banking is all the rage, but they also have meaningful number of brick and mortar branches, mostly because there are walk-in customers and there are some transactions that cannot be done electronically. They had made the traditional investment in antivirus. It was legacy antivirus and it was signature based. And so was it able to catch something that was sitting in the registry entry? No, it wasn't. So how did we wind up catching it? Well, our service had also implemented IDS component, and the IDS component was inspecting north-south traffic from the branches to the internet and back. That's north-south. And the alarm that got triggered is the CNC ransomware tracker reported. And so the IDS chirped. Now, the endpoint which was causing this problem was not within scope of the Netsurian managed open XDR service, but the IDS was. So regardless of the fact that we didn't have the endpoint under coverage, we were catching north-south traffic using the IDS. And so we were able to catch this and then probe further to understand what was going on and escalate findings to the customer with specific recommendations for decontamination, isolate those endpoints, re-image them, maybe talk about how is it that the infection got on there. Of course, we also added all of these hashes that were in play to the unsafe list that our solution maintains for auto termination. So for those endpoints covered by the Netsurian service, from here on out, if the infection had spread east-west, that is to say laterally, no problem. Despite the fact that the legacy antivirus wasn't going to catch it, the Netsurian service would and then auto terminate it from this point going forward. So how do you protect against Kovter? At an organizational level, since this thing is now spreading via spam email, obviously web content filters and attachment inspection in whatever your mail solution is a must. You probably want headers. When they receive email from an external source, there's a header that gets appended warning the user to be careful and mindful, not just click on anything. Of course, patching of the endpoints so that any of the vulnerabilities that are known can be mitigated. All easier said than done, but it's quite a bit of effort. It's bread and butter these days if you're operating a business network. On a user level, it's always worth training the users again and again not to click on goofy attachments, and then have mock phishing campaigns to identify those users that are more vulnerable and more prone to doing these kinds of harmful behavior, and making sure they get the attention they need from a training perspective. If you're still sticking with traditional antivirus, here's your opportunity to upgrade to next generation EDR. The service offered as an option within the Netsurian managed open EDR uses deep learning, and you cannot simply get away with something in memory, something injected as a technique that the antivirus is helpless against. In fact, our solution will identify, catch, and forestall such attempts. So upgrading your antivirus is a useful step. And then, of course, you have to assume breach. No matter what you do from a defense perspective, since perfect protection is not practical, you should be monitoring. And to do that, an extended detection and response solution like the one that Netsurian managed open XDR offers, backed by a 24/7 SOC so that you can detect and be aware. In the example you saw that it was IDS that chirped. Someone had been there paying attention, understanding what it means, following up, left, right, up, and down, then that alert would have occurred and no one would have really cared or known about it, and the infection would have spread. So a 24/7 SOC for detection and response is in fact a necessity these days. Well, I hope this was useful.